All right, you're good.
Okay, set this on the ground. Well, you know, other than we know what Eddie's been doing all week, and I guess he would call that a praise report. Well, I guess if you get out in the hayfield, that is praise, isn't it? If anybody got anything they want, anything good this week worth mentioning that's happened or?
I had a colonoscopy and whatever they call it, going down your throat, and everything was good.
Good.
Thank the Lord for that.
Yeah, that's always good, and thank the Lord it's behind you.
That's a rough, the test's not bad, but Betty, that's a rough thing to do.
Yeah.
I know everybody does.
The before of the test is nothing after you.
Glad I got 10 more years before I have to do it again.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're back this morning in the book in 1 Peter. I don't know why when I looked at it for a minute, I thought, no, we're supposed to be in Timothy, but that's right, it's Peter that we've been studying. The last couple weeks we've been in this book, and we talked, one of our titles was Holy Living, and called it Holy Living, and last week was God's Chosen People. So he has talked about our responsibility, what we've been given through Jesus, what our lives are to be like, what it's to look like as we live, how we're to treat people, just kind of a whole picture of what we are. And we skipped today. We were in chapter 2 last week or 3? 2, yeah, that's what I thought. We were in chapter 2 last week, and we skipped over to chapter 4. So as Brother Bowen used to always tell us, we need to read between the picture and see, because we want to look at whole books as we do them, and it's always good. Sometimes, I know a lot of times when we used to study, and he would tell us that, there would have been things that had happened in between the scriptures that we were studying that were really important to help us understand what was going on, why, the writer was saying what he had. And we'll notice, and I don't know, it might have been a woman that wrote this lesson or something, I'm not sure. Just kidding. And if we look back at chapter 3, which we're skipping over, the subtitle on my chapter 3 is Submission to Husbands. It says, wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives. So it's talking about, the conduct that we should have as wives. And but then it says, husbands, in verse 7, likewise dwell with him with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. So he doesn't tell the wives to do something, and he doesn't tell the husband to equally, if she shows you honor, you show her the same honor. It's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street to do that. And it also talks about calling to be blessed, and that, what Jesus has come to the earth to do for us. And it talks about a little bit about, let me see. No, that was a little bit before the end of chapter 2 that we didn't talk about. One of the subtitles was Submission to the Government. It says, therefore, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme, or to governors as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. So he's pretty broad in this book, telling us, to submit to our government, that we have earthly powers and authorities that are set up to make our communities. Just think if there were no police, if there was no kind of government, if everybody kind of went and did their own thing and there was no authority over them, it would be pretty chaotic if we didn't do it. And, he's saying that we are to obey those laws, that just because you can't say, well, I'm a Christian and Christ tells me that, to listen to him, that I don't have to do this. He is saying, to submit to those laws that were put in place against evildoers. Now, some, as you know, as we've studied and read and even seen in our days, some of the government and the laws have gotten pretty evil and wicked, and there were a lot of deaths because of them. And I don't think he wants us to be a part of that kind of thing. But as you notice, those, when you get a central authority and power, it kind of turns to where that it's for a single person, not for the good of the community. That it gets to be that this person, has a power trip in themselves, and it's not for the good of the community that he was talking about. And it also talks about servants. It says, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. And he wanted us, to show godliness, you have to be submissive to that. And I think that even goes over to your job or anything you partake in, that if you're a believer in Christ and you're going to want to hold that high standard, that people need to be able to look to you, and you don't need to be a person that sleeps through work and then, doesn't do his part, and then at lunch want to talk to everybody about Christ. It's a bad witness for you, for the example of living that you set. We've even talked about with children, we're talking about their silly things they do and their thoughts, but, children watch us so much more than what we say to them. They watch how we live. Is what's going to make the big difference in them. It's not as much the words, which, the words can build up or break down, but also their eyes watch us, how we treat people, how we, do our jobs, or how we treat our elders and stuff. That they see that and they carry that through. So this morning, the title of our lesson is Witness in the Midst of Suffering, and it comes from 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7 through 19. So let's start. I was going to say the lesson aim. I don't know if you'll have this in your book. It says, beware lest under the pressure of temptation you conform to the world. Be ashamed of Jesus, refuse your cross, and thereby lose your crown. Suffering there must be. Look to the end. Anticipate the glory which it begins, and against all that would rob you of the fullness of that glory, watch unto prayer. So beware lest under the pressure of temptation you conform to the world. So we're all pressured on every side, and it's not usually the pressure to be good. That's the lesser of it. The pressures of maybe not to be evil necessarily, but the pressures can cause you to flare up and do things that aren't in your best interest. But, during the midst of it, sometimes we're blinded and don't see it. And I wanted to read you a little bit. It says about the lesson background. It says Peter is writing on the eve of the dreadful persecution of the church by Nero, which was already beginning to be felt. So the Christians in the time that we're looking at and the hard times they were having, after I studied this lesson, I was thinking about it. They not only had the Roman Empire that was in control right then, that had all kind of pagan practices and religions that the Jewish people had tried to set themselves aside from and be apart from that. But the Jews also had their Jewish religion and traditions that they had followed since they had come out of Egypt. So the Christians, after Jesus died, the Christians were a new group of people in the midst of this. So that they were, you know, a new group that the Romans didn't like what they were doing. That, you know, they didn't want them worshiping Jesus or having, you know, a single God that they said was above all, that the, you know, that they were monotheistic, I think today. So they had the Romans against them, plus they also had their brother Jews against them, because most of the Jews did not recognize Jesus when they came, even though that they had, you know, studied about, and that's what they were looking forward to, was the birth of the Messiah. But a lot at the time didn't see that. So as we see, these Christians were really, really isolated at the time, because they, you know, they had the following that Jesus, they had the disciples. So just think, if you were one of the disciples, that you were beginning something that nobody had ever heard of, that a lot of people were very angry. And as we see here, it's written that, you know, the established government, Nero, they were going to start persecuting very harshly once you do that. So this is what these Peter, as we're looking at now, and Paul, all the disciples, they were trying to teach and grow Christianity under these harsh circumstances. And without the Lord, it would, if you just simply think about the facts of the time right then, if it had not been the Lord's will, Christianity would have been stamped out at the time. But as we know, it will not be stamped out, nor will this book, no matter what comes against it. All right. We'll read verse 7 through 11. It says, "But the end of all things is at hand. Be ye therefore sober and watch unto prayer. And above all things, have fervent charity among yourselves, for charity shall cover the multitude of sins. Use hospitality to one another without grudging. As every man hath received a gift, even so minister the same one to another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. If any minister, let him do it of the ability which God giveth, that God in all things may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom be praise and dominion forever and ever." So he's saying, you know, the end of things is coming, where they have seen the Lord living on this earth. They have seen him crucified, and they had heard his promise that he would return for his people. So they were very aware of the world they were living in, but also what their prize was at the end of his life. And it says, "And above all things, have fervent charity among yourselves." And, you know, within a church, we all have different ideas about specific things. As we read the Bible, there are some things that are very crystal clear. There are some things that we aren't given the exact meaning, or it's the book of Revelation. It's something that I guess I could read and study the rest of my life and still be really, I don't know what's going on. But we have to have love for one another. We have to have, you know, especially in the church, love for our differences, and not want to, unless it's something that's very outside, that, you know, that we should be able to agree on our disagreement or whatever, that we should, you know, it shouldn't be something that we come to blows over, because, you know, I know two pastors that seem to be very knowledgeable. You know, one believes in the rapture and one doesn't believe in it. And it's, you know, till the end of times and the fulfillment of Revelation, nobody's going to know the truth of it, or, you know, exactly how it's going to be laid out. But we have to, in spite of our differences, we have to love and respect. You know, I think love and respect on them have to go together, because even if you don't totally agree with what your brother's thoughts on something, you have to give them the respect for it. It says use hospitality to one another without grudging. It says that every man receives a gift, even so minister the same to one another as stewards. So people have different gifts that, the body describes the body of Christians as your physical body, that, your eye does a job, your arm does a job, your foot. They have their specific jobs as we do. And in the Christian as a whole on the earth, they have jobs, but in the church, people we know have different jobs to do. And it's talk about speak of the oracles of God, to speak of the things that the Lord would have us say. That, it's easy to go out on your own and make your own rules or have your own thoughts and bring it up, but you got to be very careful that it's within God's will that you speak of things. Okay, our second title says, Be Joyful in Suffering. And it's going to be chapter 12 through 16. It says, Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as some strange thing happened unto you. But rejoice inasmuch as you are partakers in Christ's suffering, that when his glory shall be revealed, you may be glad also with exceeding joy. If ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye, for the Spirit of glory and of God resteth upon you as their part. If ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye, for the Spirit of glory and of God resteth upon you. On their part, he is evil spoken of, but on your part, he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on his behalf. So he's talking about a little bit harsher things in life, that, the Christian life is not going to be all flowers and happiness and, everybody patting you on the back and telling you how wonderful you are. He said your suffering is going to be like our Christ suffering, and expect it. If you truly look deep in your Bible, he doesn't try to fool people and tell them it's going to be good and you're going to be a millionaire and that's the way it's going to be, because as we look a lot of times, that's not the best thing to happen to us. And I wanted to read you all what it said in the teacher's manual. I thought it was really well written. It says, the Lord hath foretold the necessity of suffering. Sorry if I can read today. It must come. It was coming when Peter was writing. It was a burning furnace, a fiery trial, the beginning of the cruel persecutions through which believers were to pass. The prison, the torture, the sword, the stake, the lion were threatening the infant church. So these are all the things that this brand new church and these new followers, real things that they were having to face. This frenzy of persecution was strange, unheard of. There had never been the like before. The rulers of the earth had never been before banded together to root out a religion by fire and sword. Conquered nations had been allowed to worship their own gods and to retain their ancient rites, but the Son of God had come to be the Savior of the world, and the malice of Satan was stirred to the utmost. He would make a mighty effort to crush the Church of Christ. So that they were going through torture unheard of because of Jesus Christ and Satan knowing the fact that he's come here to stay. He is conquered. He was putting everything he had against it. It says, suffering weans Christians from earthly enjoyment. It helps them to lift up their eyes from earth and to see by faith the glory which shall be revealed. Men may revile them, and they will do so. When other persecution cease, these persecutions of the tongue continue. But the Spirit of glory rests on those for whom Christ's sake patiently endured. His presence is the foretaste and the pledge of the everlasting glory. He comes from the throne of glory. He brings with him the glory of holiness. He sheds the glory of a saintly life around the followers of Christ, and he rests upon them. He came down from heaven on the great day of Pentecost, not for a passing visit, but to abide forever with the church. And since I don't usually know what day it is or anything, I think Dennis put on Facebook this morning that today is Pentecost. Am I right? Okay, that's what I thought. So it's very fitting that we will be studying this today. But, he's saying even though this suffering is going to happen, that we have a foretaste and we have to look ahead, keep your eye on the goal. He has promised us glory in heaven, which he is not going to take back that promise, but our job is to, in spite of what's going on, plow forward. Okay, there was one thing that I wanted to look at that had been in y'all's books too. It says, to many minds, the trials which befall the good and the bad alike seem hardly consistent with the benevolent character of God. But the end of the divine government is to place every man in a position of moral discipline, to give him an opportunity to resist temptation, to cultivate virtual habits, to live an obedient and submissive and truly religious life. The believer in Christ is put upon his probation, and it is seen whether his faith is strong in his love, sincere, time trial, all. So, the trials on earth, we talk about grow us in our faith. If things get really easy and we don't have any trials for anything, sometimes that thing's not, you find out that after a while that it's not worth much to you. If it's so simple and given and you don't have to do anything to maintain it, you kind of get bored with it and it's gone. But, these trials build our character and help us to be able to help others as we do that. Because, when you go through trials and things, it's easier for you to witness to somebody else about them when you know personally than, when you tell somebody how to raise a child, but you've never had a child before. It's kind of different, once you have, you would tend to listen to somebody more that has 10 children, that as far as how to do that. And especially if they stay at home, at least. It says, if you be reproached for the name of Christ, our lesson says the followers of Christ can expect to be reviled, evil spoken of, and slandered for his name and his sake. It says, so we expect that these mockeries, bad talk is going to happen. He warned us that this is going to happen. It happened to me when I came to earth, and it's going to happen to you. But the lesson writer here, I thought this was good, also says we can expect God to impart his Spirit to us in proportion to our sufferings for him, and thus our joy and peace will be increased. So even though we're expecting these sufferings, we're also expecting him to be with us and help us through them. And that's what, if we think of the disciples at the time, without him, they could not have made it through what they were going through. So he always, it says, although our opposers may blaspheme him, yet the patience we show in time of suffering and trial and the purity of our lives, we can bring honor and glory to his name. So as we go through these trials and as we successfully go through them, as we had talked last week, and Patty had brought out, he never quit. Things never quit coming against us, no matter who we are, no matter how long we've been Christians, no matter, and sometimes maybe more as we do, but as we move through those, we gain strength to move through the next as they come, and we can look back. It says, don't let none of you suffer as a murderer, as a thief, as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. So we look at this and, okay, look, none of you suffer as a murderer. Okay, so we have levels. So murder would be pretty high, what we think. Murder or as a thief, that's right under there. We were just talking about that. Or is somebody doing evil? Or a little old busybody. Why was that put there with murderers? We look in terms of levels of doing stuff. And I think the Lord sees no levels of doing stuff. Is that, you are either here or there. That, we want to say, Johnny is much worse than I am. He does all this thieving and he's an evildoer, and I just call and talk about the women at the church sometimes every now and then. So, I'm not nearly as bad as they are. I think we try to fool ourselves in doing that. That the Lord sees the same evildoers in everything they do, because he has lumped some pretty different things in these, but he didn't say, but let you not suffer as a murderer, as a thief, or a busybody's okay. He has named out every one of them as things that we're not to be protected in, and he didn't set a level for them. It doesn't say you can do this a little bit, but no. The lesson writer says, be much at home, setting things right within your own heart and life, where there is so much work and such daily need of diligence, and then you will find no leisure for unnecessary idle prying into the ways and affairs of others. So if you're busy doing what you're supposed to be, keeping yourself straight, you don't have time to worry about everybody else. And I found that stuff out the hard way. It's like, if you do check yourself, you're pretty busy doing that. And that's what he's saying. It says, yet if a man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on his behalf. Okay, look at verse 17 through 19. It says, for the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of the Lord? And if the righteous scarcely be saved, where shall the ungodly and the sinner appear? Wherefore, let them that suffer according to the will of God commit the keeping of their souls to him in well-doing, as unto a faithful Creator. Okay, so it says, let the judgment first come to the house of God. I'll read it in the teacher that says the house of God needs visiting and purging. So, and we're not talking about, if you're thinking about, we're in church and we're all righteous and sanctified, and all this book is talking about those people out there. He's saying, let begin here. The things that creep into this church that we kind of want to look over and look outside and point a finger over. So it says the house of God needs visiting and purging. Such is the weakness of man's nature, that evil things soon discourage us, and good things, except we wrestle with our spirits, prove a snare to best. Even the church of God, after a long time of peace, is apt to gather a corruption as water does by standing, as the air itself will do if it does not have the wind to purge it. So, if a church can become real stale and stagnant, and trouble starts cropping up. if people aren't moving forward and doing, something's usually going on, whether it be good or evil, something is usually going on. And it's saying that the church is not immune to this happening, as anything else is. And it says, if the righteous scarcely be saved, where shall the ungodly and the sinner appear? So it's hard as it is for the church, we have to look at that. It says the righteous is scarcely saved because its enemies are so many and so strong, and temptations swarm around him. He needs all the armor. So I like how it put it, said the enemies are so many and so strong, and temptations swarm around him. And that if you think sometimes when there are the things that are coming against you, swarming, that seems a good word to use around it. It seems like it just kind of overtakes you. You think about a swarm of bees, just kind of relentless and doesn't let back on you. It says, wherefore let them that suffer according to the will of God commit the keeping of their souls to him as unto a faithful creators. So we have to place all our hope and all our trust in him. And if we don't have him to help us with that, we can't do it in the midst of everything that goes on and battles with us. This was a little bit shorter. Does anybody have anything to add to the lesson? You want to answer a couple questions this morning? It says, why does God allow trials to come to us? Why didn't he just let us live a separate life from the world?
Well, it helps let you, I think, become stronger in your faith. But I mean, when you have the trials, a lot of times I don't think you could achieve it if you didn't have a Lord on your side.
It overcomes, I mean, kind of like drowning, I guess, when it
Helps see power.
okay, you see. And did you say it helps? Say it, if once you became saved, if you became a millionaire and never had another problem again, how apt would you be to go out in the world and tell anybody else about the Lord? You'd be real busy and you're a millionaire to do no problems that you probably wouldn't want to get around anybody that was on Highway 1770 or something.
I think our trials that, when we suffer and we get through it, we're going to be, partakers of God's glory in the end.
And, I guess I always have to imagine and relate things before it sticks. And sometimes with my forgetfulness now, I still go. With your kids, there's a lot of things that you can tell them, no, don't do that way. And you could, it's certain things, you could make them do it the way because you've done it and you know what's best or what's hurting. Do you do that? Do you at times, or even a lot of times, let them find out for themselves, let them go through the trials because it makes them, if you cushioned your child from every bad thing on the earth, what would happen to that
They
child?
have to be strong enough to get through it all.
Right.
They have to suffer through it.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
like you had suffered.
Yeah, if you just totally sheltered them from everything, and we see kids that obviously that's happened to, they're not very good adults. They can't handle anything that comes. And I guess I just always have to relate the Lord's love to us as the same as he gave us for our children and the things that, how we allow them. We don't try to take everything away because if they don't build up and get this strength, then life's going to be harder for
I
them.
don't want this one nowadays.
Yeah.
You try to tell them something, and, I mean, they just don't believe, they think, well, how do you know that? Did you go through that? Well, yeah, I did, but I'm trying to help you not to have to go through that. But I don't know, my kids may be different, I don't know.
Sometimes
It's hard to get through to them.
Yeah, sometimes they do. Yeah, I can remember pretty much everything Dad would tell me that I would be like, no, that's not, I'm gonna go ahead and do this, and I would always go back and think, he was right. And as you did that more and more, I kind of got less hard-headed and knew, even though it wasn't what I would choose, that he was gonna be right. So sometimes I would do that because I knew I don't want to do this, but I know he's right.
Well, I try to, tell them, I did the same thing, I didn't listen to what I was told. And a lot of times it got me in trouble. But they still, it's just hard, I think, to try to get through to our kids today, or it is mine.
Yeah.
But you can tell them, say, well, I went through this.
Maybe
I did the same thing by not listening.
Well, Gene, because they've inherited a stubborn streak or something.
Don't you say nothing. I'm gonna put Eddie's shirt on you.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, they got it. One of them did.
Yeah, and sometimes they have to plow through it and get the mud on their face, and it comes out, and that usually comes out pretty good. If it's not something so dangerous, they don't make it through, but they learn by the trials and the fiery trials, and sometimes the fiery paddle helps.
I just pray for them.
And try to lead them, and
Just show them the best,
and I think that's what the Lord does for us. And sometimes if you think of stuff you do, that He has to be sitting there like, you do.
you're not listening.
Yeah, even as adults,
Should be able to reach down here and peck her head.
Yeah.
It's like,
I guess years ago, alcohol was pretty bad when people were growing up. And now it's drugs, and it seems like the drugs
They've got
get a bigger hold on you than the alcohol did.
Yeah.
And like I heard a fellow say the other day, he said, when you got a child who gets hooked on drugs and they go to rehab, and they don't do any good, he said, the only thing you can fall back on is the Lord pray for.
Some of these drugs now, because they're so diluted, I mean, you can maybe not have another chance. I mean, sometimes they just kill you, that fentanyl, or however you say it exactly, that, sometimes you might not have a chance to get over that or get past it, because it's just so bad. And I think kids think, because it is so different in their childhood now than it was for us. And I guess, as you look back, and as I watch some of these older shows, even I noticed some things that they'll talk about that was going on in society even then that was there. But now it seems like it's everywhere. It's not big cities, or it's not, but, the drugs and everything have filtered in to small towns and stuff. And like you say, and I may be wrong, Buford is learned about this, but the meth and stuff, it seems like I've read that it's even more addictive than heroin and stuff that, was meth even around when we were younger, but it's just something that gets such a hold on immediate, pretty much, from what it sounds. It says, is there any disgrace to suffering? We're all learning, aren't we? Sometimes there's more disgrace if you think you know it all. And
Look at the suffering he went through.
Yeah.
I mean,
for nothing that he did. you know,
He didn't do anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And he suffered.
Says, where does judgment often begin and why? Where did our scripture say judgment needed to begin?
In us, house of God.
In people that might think they're righteous, that we need to look in the mirror. Oh, it says, why may the righteous scarcely be saved?
To show that, you know, that they have the hope of salvation. If they can be saved.
And it's a very difficult road, even though you're saved, to maintain that. So what shall be the end of them that obey not the gospel?
He lost.
Or you can return.
According to the will of God.
Whoa. But God is love.
But he's also just faithful and honors what he says.
And what he tells you, he'll do for you. If you don't do it, he also tells you what's going to happen. So he's good stuff.
Nothing's hidden. And, you know, and it says that his will is that all will be saved. He's not holding back anything from anybody. Whoever holds it back has this person to blame.
All you gotta do is commit yourself. I guess it boils down to what do you call it, you know, what you commit to.
Right. Yeah, you know, you can think of blame everything on Adam and Eve, what happens to you in life, but it's you now. You know, he has risen us above that. It's our choice now. We can't say because sin's in the world, this world's bad, I'm going to go to hell because of it. He's gave us all the choice. We each have that choice, and nobody can make it. We can't make it for our kids. You know, we can kind of lead them, live a life in front of them, but ultimately we can't make that commitment. Like Eddie says, that's a daily commitment that you have to live through.
Adam and Eve had the same choice. They would make a wise choice.
No. But he didn't leave us all up to the mercy of Adam and Eve's choice. You know, he gave us our choice.
I think the main thing is we need to place our lives in his hand. It's just like the lesson said, we're gonna have trials, struggles, temptations. But we've gotta believe in him and follow him and try to do what's right or do what's right. And then he'll take care of us.
Right. And not give up halfway through the journey.
You know,
Oh, this is too hard, I can't do it. You
sometimes you feel like it, but then you think, no, I don't have to do that.
Absolutely.
Pick up that Bible and read.
Keep the street. Well, thank you guys.